Now, of course, we all know, at least we here in this room all know, is that if we go to Mars, if we put boots on Mars, it will not be just humans there. There will be robots with us as helpers, as scouts. There will be, some robots sent before us to probably to help us assemble whatever we need to assemble while we're there on Mars. There will be a lot of work by robots. But what not everyone realizes is that without the precursor missions of robots scouting right now already for us humans what Mars is like Curiosity is doing with the radiation, we want to know what humans can expect, so we can build our spacesuits for them, we can build our EVA equipment, we can build the habitat that they will live in, to specifics. Without that, there would be no boots on Mars, however hard we might want to get the boots on Mars. So, like I said, the next panel is going to discuss that, and it's going to be led by Victoria Friedensen, who is, let me get that right, because that's always hard. She's the program executive of the Advanced Exploration Systems. She's the manager there, and she's doing the Joint Robotic Precursor Activities Office. I would like to give the floor to Victoria and her panel.
Thank you. Greg Schmidt. He will be our anonymous presenter today.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay.
Ready? So good morning, everybody. I can't see any of you, so I'm assuming you're there with smiling faces, I hope. We're between you and lunch, but I think this will be a very interesting topic to discuss today. I was at the last Forwarding Mars workshop with Harley and with Chris and Artemis and others, and sort of challenged them with, there are other ways to think about this, about how we can do our work ahead of time to enable human exploration and truly make it affordable. So as the Joint Robotic Precursor Activity Manager for Science and Exploration, I'm responsible for the development, implementation, and operations of missions, instruments, and other activities that will address key gaps in our knowledge about the potential human destinations. Sounds pretty fancy. But what I do is I make a lot of matches and find unique ways to answer key questions. For example, and showing on the bottom of the slide that's on the screen, Science and Exploration are co-funding radar investigation of near-Earth asteroids in order to improve our understanding of their characteristics and their orbit conditions. We're co-sponsoring the Solar System Exploration Research Virtual Institute, or SSERVI, that you'll hear more about today, which is a joint science and exploration ground-based research activity. And we have 2 instruments on the Mars Science Lab, the Radiation Assessment Detector, and the Medley, which was on the aeroshell for Mars Science Lab. These are just a few of current examples of ways that science and exploration are co-funding and co-sponsoring activities. You're going to hear more about this focused investment in precursor activities to address strategic knowledge gaps. And that's the focus of this particular panel. I hope that you'll find as we go along that by looking at strategic knowledge gaps, at ways of making these investments for exploration through science, we will be able to enable an affordable Mars program by searching out the key information that we need to know early that will affect the design, the development, and the implementation of the future human missions. So my August panel are all NASA today, but this is a new focus for us, and we wanted to get the word out, and this really is the first opportunity that we've all had to talk about the strategic knowledge gaps in such an open venue such as this. Michele Gates is our first speaker. She's the Senior Technical Advisor to NASA's Associate Administrator for Human Exploration and Operations. A PhD engineer, Dr. Gates is leading the Asteroid Redirect Mission concept and development activity. Prior to this role, she served in a temporary assignment as Acting Deputy Associate Director for Earth Science Flight Projects Continuity Missions at Goddard. Michele also served as the exploration lead for the Mars Program and Planning Group, and she'll summarize this work as a lead into our robotic exploration topic. John Connolly has participated in many strategic planning and design reference mission efforts for Mars over the years. In fact, I think John's name is on just about every Mars study we've ever conducted. After Mike Wargo's sudden death, John stepped up as the Chief Exploration Scientist in HEO, where he took over completion of exploration strategic knowledge gap refinement, and he will explain to you what this is, and assisted in writing the Mars 2020 mission announcement of opportunity. John, just last month, began a 2-year detail to serve as the director of the International Space University's Space Studies program. Lisa May is our third speaker, and she is the lead program executive for the Mars Exploration Program at NASA headquarters. Her portfolio includes the ultra-cool MAVEN mission, Mars Sample Return, and Mars Technology Development. Lisa is also the chair of the International Mars Exploration Working Group. She's been with NASA for 14 years and has worked on missions in every science discipline from pre-formulation through implementation, launch, and operations. Lisa will be telling us a bit about the upcoming Mars 2020 lander mission. Greg Schmidt, finally, is the Deputy Director and our anonymous guest for today, and Director of International Partnerships for SSERVI. He's located at the Ames Research Center. Greg also co-founded the NASA Lunar Science Institute, SSERVI's predecessor, and was a founder of the NASA Astrobiology Institute, NASA's first virtual institute. In his nearly 30 years at NASA, Greg has managed space lab payloads, led technology initiatives and programs, and developed major partnerships, both domestic and international. Greg will be presenting a holistic approach to robotic exploration and science. Thank you. Michele?
I'm going to stand so I have access to the clicker. Victoria, let's see. Victoria asked me to share with you this morning some key excerpts from the Mars Program Planning Group work that was done within NASA and actually externally in 2012. This work led to the definition of the Mars 2020 mission as the next mission for the Mars Exploration Planning Group, and also, really forged a partnership between science, human exploration, and the Technology Mission Directorate at NASA in future planning. So I'm going to share just a few slides from that work with you this morning as an intro to the rest of the august panel. My slides you may not actually be able to read on the screen, but this first one is an example roadmap that came out of the Mars Program Planning Group work. This was actually from the human exploration lens. And so you can see at the very top the International Space Station, as well as the core capability development that we have going on right now, leading into missions in the lunar vicinity, with the first purple box in the top. We described that within the context of the Mars Program Planning Group as an opportunity for near-Earth risk reduction activities for both human exploration as well as applying to science and space technology. The next major horizontal line is intended to conceptually display a series of technology development activities in space technology that would lead to a mission mode decision, conjunction or opposition class, as well as system demonstration test opportunities in the mid-2020s. The third line displays the strategic knowledge gaps that Victoria mentioned, which are also contains Science Mission Directorate, science-driven missions that answer questions for human exploration. And then the last line is really the surface and surface access including EDL and Ascent, and surface technologies, both at the initial phase, technology development, and moving into demonstration. We also considered that to be a key human spaceflight activity. The last purple box actually describes subscale test demonstrations which could be accomplished on robotic missions. So that's a really general overview of the major themes that I'll just be covering briefly. The entire MPPG package is fairly long, and actually Brett Drake led this portion of the work. This next slide describes what we took from that roadmap in terms of human exploration, science, and technology intersections. And you can see the epochs that are shown in colors, which actually have translated to what you've seen as Earth-reliant, proving ground, and Mars-ready epochs in the strategy slides that you saw earlier in this meeting yesterday. Anyway, there were four major areas of intersection that we described in detail in 2012. The first was opportunities for partnership between science and human exploration in the near-Earth vicinity, the lunar vicinity specifically, and we actually had identified a potential Mars sample return mission to crews that are already in the lunar vicinity. Thank you. I have allergies, actually. I'm not sure that's going to help, but thank you. And then two squares that outline the opportunity for technology demonstration on robotic missions. And then the third, the science-driven strategic knowledge gaps, which also benefit human exploration. Sorry, the fourth. So this body of work did result in a number of robotic precursor potential mission identifications, including, again, missions that would capitalize on human presence in cislunar space, as well as science-driven missions that buy down strategic knowledge gaps, including areas such as dust and atmospheric environment and radiation. And then again, just describing the key areas that we identified as technology demonstration opportunities for both in-space transportation as well as Mars surface access. Oops. You're right about the button. Can I not go back? Okay, so the last slide was actually two after that, please. Thank you very much. Thank you. The last slide is actually a depiction of the specific areas of strategic knowledge gaps and technology development and demonstration that this Mars Program Planning Group body of work did identify and develop mission concepts to include. And those are actually the first two areas at the top of the slide. We identified an area called the construction, that we called the construction zone, which was actually our parking lot in this work, which had to do with a definition and examination of the levels of scalability of some of the human scale technologies that would be needed for surface access, and what could be demonstrated on mission scales that were of interest and driven by science missions. So there were several areas, including actually Ascent and EDL technologies that were a part of this construction zone. And so I wanted to leave on this slide and also leave these thoughts with the audience to read at your leisure. Thank you.
Thank you, Michele.
You wanted the clicker?
Okay.
All right, we're going to see if the clicker works.
Thank you.
All right, so I have a good news presentation. But first of all, I wanted to make sure that everybody knows what strategic knowledge gaps are. We've tossed this term around, and it's not clear that maybe everyone knows what they are. In brief, strategic knowledge gaps are data sets, things we don't know that somehow affect the ultimate risk or cost of a future human mission. So if you think back to the Apollo days, we knew very little about the moon, so we launched a bunch of robotic precursors. And through those precursors, we were able to take measurements and by those measurements, knock down a whole bunch of risks and refine the design of the Apollo system. Some of those measurements didn't come in until a little too late, and the classic example is the footpad size of the lunar module. And so had we known the bearing strength of the lunar surface a little better, we would have designed much smaller footpads for Buzz to step off of. But we didn't. So we had giant footpads because we thought, well, we might sink down into this fluffy stuff. And that cost us a few hundred pounds of mass going to the moon, and where mass was very precious. So strategic knowledge gaps sometimes cost us mass, sometimes cost us money, sometimes introduce risk to the eventual human missions. Now, every mission has strategic knowledge gaps, whether it's human or robotic. And we do our best to find out all the things we need to find out before we fly the missions. And sometimes you just have to design around those things that you don't know. So, so we use science missions to find out a lot of the things we need to know about Mars. And the science missions that have flown since the 1960s have been our invaluable source of data about Mars. So I wanted to put this in perspective, because sometimes when you talk about strategic knowledge gaps, people think, oh my gosh, there's all this stuff we need to know about Mars that we don't know right now. And I took a step back and I looked at all the things we've learned about Mars, dating all the way back to the early Mars robotic missions. And I put my little pointer on my continuum at about 75%. So with everything that we've been able to acquire, from Mariner 4 all the way through the Viking landers, and then there was a little gap in missions, and then we picked up again, we went from knowing almost nothing about Mars about 75% of the way to knowing almost everything we would need and having Mars almost as well categorized as our own planet here. Now, I think there are still a few things a few bits of information we need to pick up to knock down some risks that still remain and to help us more efficiently design the missions. But the good news is that we're making great progress, and all the science missions that we have flown to Mars since the 1960s have contributed to this. I tried actually to put this in a table, and it's very hard to do. But this just shows, starting with Mariner 4 back in '64, all the way through the missions they're flying today, the kinds of data sets that they're contributing to the kind of knowledge we need to know for humans eventually to go to Mars. And you can see that this is a rather full data set, even though you can't read it very well. But things like topography and global maps of resources and maps of gravity and things like that. All these measurements that it's important for us to have to design efficient human missions. We've been making those measurements over time. There's a couple left, though, that we still think we need a little more help with. And the good news is we have some missions planned in the future to address some of these. And Lisa will talk about those next. I had to squish this list into just headlines, just to make this talk brief. But our current list of strategic knowledge gaps includes some that have to do with the Mars atmosphere. We're going to land a vehicle when we go to the surface of Mars with humans that is at least an order of magnitude heavier, and probably 1.5 orders of magnitude heavier than even the Curiosity rover. So getting through the entry, descent, landing sequence and knowing the atmosphere very, very well is going to be critical for a safe landing. So the characterizing the Mars atmosphere, both the upper and lower, is going to be very important to us. Eventually, we're going to have to pick a landing site, and we're going to do a lot of work on characterizing that specific spot where we're sending humans, just as we would any destination. In addition to that, we probably want to know more about forward and back contamination. These are questions we're also going to have to address if we do a Mars sample return mission as well. So these aren't necessarily unique to humans, although there are some unique aspects if you're sending a human there. Crew health, not necessarily a Mars-centric thing, but if we're sending crews out into space for however many months it takes to get there, 6 to 8 months, putting them in Mars orbit or on the Mars surface for 12 to 18 months, and then bringing them back, that's a kind of mission that we haven't flown before, so there are crew health concerns. There's also things that are specific to Mars, like the dust. It's chemical, its physical size and shape of the particles, whether those are bad for humans in case we ingest them or breathe them in. Need to know a little bit more about that. Resources is another big category. When we're exploring places like Mars, we really, really want to be able to use the resources that are available on the Martian surface to help bootstrap our existence there. It would be awesome if we found enough liquid water on Mars that we didn't have to bring tons and tons of water with us, or that we found even as much water as we needed that we wouldn't even need to bring our return fuel with us. You know, those are kind of the true living off the land principles that ISRU is all about. And then finally, there's still things we need to know about the radiation environment. We would really like to have a radiation monitor in Mars orbit and one on the surface working simultaneously, so that when a solar flare erupts, we can measure the shielding effect of the Martian atmosphere with some certainty. And then, of course, there's places like Phobos and Deimos. If those are intermediate destinations before we go down to the surface, there's more we need to know about those as well. So you put those all together, and it's a nice compact list. It's not nearly as long as it was 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, and certainly it's nowhere near as long as it was back in 1964. We've learned a whole lot about Mars through the science missions that we've flown, and there's a few more things we'd like to know before we send human crews out there, and those are our strategic knowledge gaps.
Thank you, Greg. Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm going to give you a little background on those science missions, not necessarily the history of them, but the ones we're doing now, the ones coming up in the next decade, and the perhaps lesser known role we've had and joint planning we've had with the human exploration part of NASA for a very long time. Before I get started, I will say that we've had a Mars Exploration Assessment Group advisory, part of the advisory structure for NASA for a very long time, that has set goals for scientific Mars exploration, and those goals have always included Goal 4, which is prepare for humans. So the division, or a perceived division, is just that, it's perceived. This has always been part of NASA's view of how we work in both science and preparing for exploration. And the other part is that it's almost a false dichotomy between a strategic knowledge gap and science. Science, knowledge, exploration, they're not identical synonyms, but they're awfully close. And so again, to feel like this is novel or breaking down barriers, it is in some ways breaking down semantics. So, and this really shows you that we have this vision of sending humans to Mars, and that it is at the intersection of what we do in technology development, what we do in scientific robotic exploration, and of course in the human exploration endeavor. And those three relatively separate activities within NASA are working really hard to merge and to be more intentional in our joint precursor missions and our joint efforts and planning. So this is my only word chart, I think, which I find really boring. But There are two ways to look at this. I mean, the one way is to look at robotic missions as being human exploration missions, and that they are somehow scoped and objectives set by the human exploration folks to achieve human exploration objectives and goals, and that science would come along for the ride. The other way to do this is to look at science missions, and that exploration comes along for the ride. I mean, right now we have RAD, which I'm sure all of you know was doing radiation measurements in Cruise while MSL was on its way to deliver Curiosity to the surface. And it's continuing to take radiation measurements. As Victoria mentioned, we have MEDLEY, which was the instrumented aeroshell for MSL as it delivered Curiosity to the surface. And that has addressed, we did a lot of reconstruction efforts after that, jointly funded by the chief engineer and the science directorate, to do some reconstruction of that MEDLEY data to inform both future designs, aeroshell designs, in the way that John was talking about, and not carrying excess margin, but also characterizing the atmosphere and its effects on things entering. So that's one of the ways in which we've done the putting exploration payloads on science missions. But as we go forward, I would like to propose that we are actually being more intentional with each passing mission, each upcoming mission, that we are being more intentional about how the objectives of that mission and payloads of that mission will serve both needs, and to move forward in a way that does move the agency and the human race towards humans to Mars. Someone let a bird in. Here are the Mars missions. This is the Mars program as it exists right now and the upcoming missions that we have. We have operational missions at Mars, including Odyssey, MRO, and Mars Express, which is a European mission on which NASA has significant participation. And part of why we have a Mars program, particularly a Mars exploration program in the Science Mission Directorate, of course, is to do the science that has been done by Odyssey and MRO and Mars Express and the landers and rovers, to characterize Mars, to understand Mars as a system, to push forward in our knowledge of how the solar system formed and evolved. But they also have taught us an awful lot about having a program, a Mars program, which is what we need now in order to do the more advanced science objectives that we have laid out for ourselves. But it's also a precursor to operations when we send humans, because certainly humans will not operate at Mars without infrastructure and a program and an operations model that we are also exploring as we develop our knowledge base about Mars. One of the things John mentioned is characterizing landing sites. We have come an awful long way since Pathfinder about characterizing landing sites. Now we use the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter to give us those beautiful high-rise images that you've all seen, but also to give us high-resolution information about places we might want to put our next landed assets, as well as continuing to do the science, for example. The recurring slope lineae, the appearance of some sort of flow on the surface seasonally on Mars, which may indicate that there is subsurface water in places we did not previously think. Also, the radars on Mars Express and on Odyssey, Mars Express and on MRO, are identifying subsurface water at lower latitudes than we previously thought. Again, closing those gaps, as John pointed out. And of course, we have opportunities still roving Mars, and we have Curiosity about to wrap up its second Earth year on Mars, if you can believe it. It feels like it landed yesterday. And they are providing us with you know, it's almost hard for me to imagine a time when we weren't really sure there had been water on the surface of Mars. I almost can't even say it, and it's certainly been within my scope, even at NASA headquarters, let alone my scope at NASA. But it's true, those rovers have really identified places where persistent liquid water had to have existed, where habitable environments once existed. And moving forward in our understanding of that planet and preparing for a different kind of habitability on Mars, they're going to provide us with an awful lot of information. Also, we have MAVEN. MAVEN arrives at Mars on September 21st, 10 p.m. Eastern, and will begin its primary science mission, launched last November, And it is our first mission to study the upper atmosphere of Mars. And so some of the atmospheric physics, and particularly atmospheric loss and escape, and the magnetic fields at Mars. So providing some knowledge that was on your list, I hope.
Yep.
So even as we go, we are exactly filling in that table that John presented. Coming up, we have joint missions with the European Space Agency in 2016 and 2018. We're providing Electra UHF radios for relay on the European 2016 orbiter, which will study the lower atmosphere of Mars. So our international partners as well are filling in those gaps with us. And those Electra radios bring me to another point about having a program. The communications infrastructure is critical for our rovers because we don't want to spend a lot of landed mass on communication infrastructure on a rover. We use orbiters to relay all of that data back. It will be, I'm sure, a similar requirement when we do send humans to Mars that they have a communications infrastructure. And we certainly have learned a lot about that and are hoping to pilot some other options as we go forward about communications architectures and infrastructures at Mars. And of course, the 2020 rover that was approved in December of 2012 and was a direct result of our efforts jointly with HEO on the Mars Program Planning Group. I've called it MPPG too long. And that rover is what's coming up next. That's the next big thing out of the Mars Exploration Program and the Science Mission Directorate. And you'll notice that it has all of those components from my first slide. It has exciting potential for in situ science. I can't tell you exactly what it is because those instrument proposals are under evaluation right now. But this summer we'll be able to tell you a lot about the exciting in situ science objectives and opportunities with this mission. But the other thing is it will enable the future. It will enable the future because it will carry a cache to cache samples. It will teach us about the technology that's needed for the highest priority science objective out of the planetary science decadal survey. But it will make that cache returnable so that potentially in the future we can go robotically, we can go with humans, we can return that cache. But that's an important piece of enabling future science about Mars and identifying some technologies we need and making them work on Mars. But the highlighted box down there, of course, is that we put out a joint announcement of opportunity. This solicitation and these payload evaluations are joint with Human Exploration and with the Space Technology Mission Directorate in order to ensure that there are integral payloads that directly prepare us for future human exploration of Mars. And this actually came out of the science definition team, so one really shouldn't take any of the science objectives as written in stone or drilled in regolith or cord in any way. But this is certainly representative of the kinds of payloads we hope to be pulling from the payload, to be selecting from the payloads that are in evaluation, or maybe even more exciting things. But why we're excited for that in situ science. We're excited for the opportunity to learn more about the habitability and the history of Mars. And we're excited about storing away a cache, proving that we can do that technology, which is a more sophisticated sampling system than we're using now, than we've used previously, and understanding that drilling and coring on Mars, as well as putting a cache down that could be returned. And yes, we're really excited about this mission because it is a joint effort to prepare for future exploration of Mars. And with that, I will hand it to you, Greg.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa.
While they bring up the slides, what a privilege to be here and talk with you. I think, like a lot of you, I grew up in the 60s and saw these amazing human missions culminating in the missions to the moon. 2001: A Space Odyssey is still my favorite film of all time. I expected fully that by now we would be in orbit around Jupiter and perhaps even Saturn. But that being said, aren't we doing some pretty cool things in Lisa's program and the cool things that our predecessor speakers talked about? It's just amazing where we are right now. What I want to talk about a little bit is a framework, a perspective. As Victoria mentioned, a holistic view of how humans and robots can work together. And what I have this aligned to is the degree of autonomy that these human-robot systems have. And it's really important to think of these as systems of humans and robots working together. And this would start from science operations that are performed by a crew, which is the least autonomous of the various options, and then end in fully autonomous robots. I have a picture there to the right that just illustrates how much robots really become part of our lives. This is a little company down the street from us at NASA Ames called Double Robotics. And they make these things that look like Segways, and you put an iPad on top of them, and you can drive these around. We have 2 of these at our institute so that people can visit us from other locations, headquarters, or wherever else. And it's just illustrative of the sort of things that I think that we can accomplish by humans and robots working together. So starting with crew-performed science operations, I think the 2 best examples from past missions, excluding, of course, ISS and other LEO missions, are LSEP. Of course, Buzz, and Neil dropped the first LSEP experiments on the moon. Spectacular success. We're still getting data from the retroreflectors on the moon. And of course, the Apollo sample collection. I'll mention a few words about that in the conclusion. One of the things that I want to emphasize here is field training. It's very important to realize this was a huge part of the Apollo program. We actually, at our institute, had Lee Silver come and talk with us one time about what he had done with the various Apollo missions, and we have continued this through our own institute, training the next generation of lunar, asteroid, and Mars scientists so that they can recognize features via training on similar features on the Earth. This is a great opportunity as well for international collaboration. We have things going with the Canadians on the Sudbury Crater Complex, and there's formations all around the world that are of enormous interest that we can just learn so much about and train people to recognize things once humans get out there. Next category we go to, and in just a little bit more operation, is human-operated robots. I believe you heard a little bit about this yesterday. And the best illustration of this right now is in a proposed Orion mission to the Earth-Moon L2, where we intend to emplace dipole antennas to observe the cosmic microwave background in a certain portion of the radio spectrum that'll give us some insight into the early universe, and then to also get samples from a part of the moon that it turns out is very important for not only lunar history but solar system history. And I think in so doing, what we're going to do is learn about such techniques once we send humans to Mars. So I think this could be a very, very useful sort of exercise. Let's see. Moving on to one level of increasing autonomy, I believe you may be hearing more about this tomorrow morning from Terry Fong, who is here at this conference. We have the category, the general category of human-robot collaboration, where robots are working a little bit more independently, but they're still working with the astronauts that are on the object of interest. And so what we have here is an idea that perhaps robots can serve as scouts for astronauts. And what they can do is be the eyes on the ground that take take the data, the high-resolution data from orbit, and get even better data, and take a look at the rocks, and take a look at all the other things of interest, and say, you know what, we want to go here. This is a really cool place. Astronaut time now and for the foreseeable future is going to be incredibly, incredibly valuable, of course. And so what we want to do is have robots to be able to work with us to make the absolute most of every second of astronaut time. So I think a simple illustration of why this is useful is our experience on Apollo 17. I spoke with Jack Schmidt about this just last month, as a matter of fact. And we had one of the wonderful discoveries from Apollo 17 was the orange glass. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the surprise and exclamation that Jack had when he saw this, you know, in the otherwise gray lunar landscape. Well, this was discovered on the trek to the South Massif, and then coming back, and the orange glass was next to the Shorty crater, and there wasn't a lot of time to explore it, although samples were certainly taken. The question is, you know, what if they had had more time, and what else is there? You know, what else is there that they might not have discovered? That's something that we're probably going to have to wait an awfully long time to answer. And I think this is just a really simple way of seeing how important this kind of technology is. At the bottom, you see a schematic for how this would work. It's really quite simple with starting with orbital information, the best image data, and other data that you have. You do a plan for a robotic traverse, and then you use that information to do an improved plan for an astronaut traverse. So, and the benefits are many, of course. It improves the science return, reduces operational risk, et cetera. Going into the next category here, with even more automation, you have what I'll call semi-autonomous robots. And I think that the best examples of these are the Robot Explorers and Leases program. And MER was perhaps the first example of that, where you have, because of the long time lag, you have situations where these robots have to be given goals. Rather than controlling them every second of the way, what you have to do is you have to say, you know, we want you to go to this rock, and we want you to figure out the best path to get there. And the folks in our advanced robotics group at NASA Ames, and plus a lot of other great institutions, have figured out ways of doing that. It was really successful in MER. I think that it's advanced yet another several degrees for the Mars missions that we have going now. And this could be useful in other circumstances when we get to Mars as well, for when astronauts get to Mars, for potentially controlling swarms of robots, using high-level control, where it might be advantageous to have a much shorter loop in terms of the time lag. The key question we have to ask here is, what advantage does a crew give over having a science operations crew, such as we do with MER and MSL? The final category, of course, is full autonomy for an entire mission. We're not there yet. But the best example is the MSL mission, and of course the 7 minutes of terror that I'm sure, like me, everyone was watching on the NASA channel as MSL came in for its landing, and obviously all of those 7 minutes had to be pre-programmed. The craft had to be fully autonomous during that phase. But like I say, we're not there yet in terms of doing a fully autonomous mission, in terms of pre-planning for science. There's too much in terms of human intelligence that's needed for this. I want to give just a very brief slide, show you a slide here of our institute. We are helping in these kind of endeavors. We have 9 teams that we just selected, thanks to John's and Victoria's very hard work last year. We just announced those just a few months ago. They're up and running now. We have 7 international partners that we're working with very closely. We've gotten involved in the Global Exploration Roadmap, and so we intend to be very much a partner in this really great endeavor here. So in conclusion, what I want to do is say that it's really clear that robots are going to be helpful. I think that the SKG work that John talked about, certainly we need robotic explorers to reduce those risks, to answer those SKGs that John spoke of. And there's a great deal of science, of course, left to do with robots as well. But what I want to do is close with a perspective that to make the huge advancements, humans really are needed. So sample return, for instance. Luna returned 0.32 kilograms of materials from 3 sites, as opposed to Apollo, which returned 382 kilograms from 2,000 separate sample locations. And maybe the best perspective here is from Steve Squires, the PI for Spirit and Opportunity, who in his book, Roving Mars, a few years ago said that the unfortunate truth is that most things our rovers can do in a perfect sol, a Mars day, a human explorer could do in less than a minute. So I think that let's send humans to Mars and let's get that great science. Thanks.
Thank you, Greg.
5 more minutes.
Okay, so I think we have time for 2 questions, and
Gary Fisher, Explore Mars. Can we expect that one of the primary site selection criteria for the 2020 rover is that it will be sent to where we expect to send humans? And all the follow-on rovers or landers would also be getting to the same spot where we expect to send humans, and if not, why not?
Well, for starters, right now we're getting ready to have our first landing site workshop for Mars 2020. And the primary requirements for that landing site, besides engineering feasibility, because it will be within the landing capabilities we have, I didn't mention this when I was describing it, but it is very much based on Curiosity and MSL for reasons of reusing technologies we've developed. So there'll be the engineering safety aspects, but then the science objectives as they form when we select the payloads for this mission will inform the site we choose to land. And the technologies we will need to land humans are going to be very different. The systems, as John pointed out, are going to be much larger. Just the idea of engineering feasibility of landing in a site may be a very different set of requirements when we get to the point of landing human systems on Mars. And the idea that we would send all rovers to the same place is one that it really will evolve as we move forward with the next set of missions and the next set of missions and eventually human missions in terms of the specific objectives of those missions.
I would have to add that from a human exploration standpoint, as Lisa said, the feasibility of the exact landing location, but we don't know where we would want to go to specifically, except that it would be somewhere very scientifically interesting. So the kinds of areas that might be attractive for current robotic exploration may still be very attractive for human exploration when it's time to go.
Thank you.
Hi, Chris Gilbert, consultant from Germany. A few years ago, I recall there were a number of studies using or suggesting the use of unmanned aerial vehicles on Mars to carry out reconnaissance. But it seems that unmanned aerial vehicles are now either not desired or that lunar or that terrestrial rovers are preferred. Don't you see any advantages in the range that aerial vehicles could provide and have them working collaboratively with terrestrial vehicles in selecting sites for further investigation?
So we have in fact seen proposals for unmanned aerial vehicles at Mars. And they have been, the ones I have seen, have been in the context of NASA's competitive programs, that actually all of the proposals come in as competed cost-capped missions. They're evaluated for technical management and cost feasibility, as well as the excitement and the level of science they deliver against NASA's stated goals for both Mars and for the agency. And so we have a very well-informed and well-thought-out process for evaluating what is usually dozens of proposals that come in. And that's the context in which I have seen those proposals. And we have the rigorous evaluation process and the rigorous science review and the things that have risen to the top in the Mars Scout program, of which there have been 2 only that have flown, were Phoenix, the polar lander that was based on Mars Polar Lander, and Maven, which is on its way to Mars. And the truth of it is we can't fly everything, particularly in these competed cost-capped competitions. And there are a lot of really interesting concepts, not just the UAV concept, that have come into us through those competitions, but they have not been the one that was selected.
Maybe I'll add to that UAVs are a type of mobility system, essentially, somewhat between an orbiter and a rover. They give you, a different type of mobility and a different type of spatial resolution of the things you're looking at. And I think our instruments that are in orbit have gotten so good that we may not need, the UAVs for the remote sensing that we would do with them. And our rovers have gotten so good that they can go further and further, and we may just be filling that gap in, and UAVs may. I'm sure there's still measurements that they're probably the vehicle of choice for, but that's becoming less and less.
It does bring up one other thing, though. It's not specific to UAVs at Mars, but as Greg was talking, it occurred to me too. Not just within the agency, but within the world, we are getting more and more comfortable with robots and robotic systems and drones and UAVs and other, particularly in defense applications. And so as we really formulate architectures of human operations on Mars, mobility systems of all kinds, scouting systems of all kinds, things that we've become comfortable with on Earth, working partnerships with robotic systems, those have to be considered, but it's very far downstream when we will actually have a need to make a decision on a system like that.
I'll also add it's really, really hard to fly on Mars.
Yeah, the atmosphere is less than 1% of Earth, so aerial vehicles are...
I think we can take one more question.
Yeah. Oh, wait, we've got
Okay, so I know there's a lot of research out there about lava tubes and underground water on Mars. Have underground robots like augers or drills of some sort been considered, and what's the feasibility of something like that?
So drilling on Earth is hard. Drilling on Mars is harder because we don't have the fluid, so you drill on Earth, you have lots of water and things to use. So technically speaking, deep drilling on Mars is a challenge. The other challenge of that is we have the planetary protection policy, which is we are not going to take our microbes and put them on Mars in an environment in which they might grow and destroy the Mars environment. Mm-hmm. It's forward contamination. It's called forward planetary protection, and it's an agency level and actually an international treaty level policy. It's not that it couldn't be done. It's not that we might not ever do it, but at this time in husbanding our resources and making progress, we are going to be doing the technical advances that are somewhat, they're progressive, but we're not going to be stepping out there soon. It's not infeasible, it's just not on the list at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all for your time and attention.